Chapter 12. Sometimes it seemed to her that white people were obsessed with her eyes. She couldn't begin to count the number of times something like this had happened. Children pulling at the corners of their own eyes to mock her. Children, even adults, calling out, "Slanty eyes, slitty eyes, Chinaman eyes." Then there were those like Dolly, perhaps not meaning to be unkind, but still unthinking. Cruelty was painful. Thoughtlessness was merely exhausting. Dolly apparently took Hannah's silence for shyness. "It's all right, you can tell me," she said. "I wouldn't go bearing tales if it's something you don't want anyone else to know." She gave Hannah a reassuring pat on the arm. If she thought it would help her get in with the other girls, she'd tell them quicker than I could snap my fingers. "You said yourself I'm good at spelling." Dolly frowned, clearly puzzled by the change of topic. "I did, but to get good at spelling, I study the speller." "Yes, of course, but I still don't, Dolly was quiet for a moment, then turned to stare hard at Hannah. Hannah kept her face still. She knew that Dolly was examining her expression, trying to determine if what she had said was in any way spiteful. "So that means," Dolly spoke slowly, "that you can see perfectly well. You can see all of the words in the speller." Her mood shifted yet again with another giggle. "Well, you have to admit it's a natural question, your eyes being shaped like that, smaller and all." Hannah could almost hear her patience fraying. "Actually, it's not really logical when you think about it. Ned has big eyes, right? Bigger than Albert's. But no one would ask Albert if he sees worse than Ned." Dolly blinked in obvious confusion. Then, "Yes, Ned's eyes are nice, aren't they? Don't you think he's the handsomest of the boys? But I think Sam would be the most fun to step out with." And with that, she was off, babbling about the boys. Hannah allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. She'd managed to say what she wanted to say. They walked on toward Main Street. As they neared the corner, Hannah slowed her steps and broke into Dolly's monologue. "I think I'll go back now," she said. "Don't you want to look in the shops with me? Sometimes there are new things after the freight train comes through." Hannah shook her head. "No, thank you." As she turned away, a wagon careered around the corner so fast and wildly that both girls had to leap out of the way. It rattled and banged to a stop just beyond them. The man who jumped down from the seat had a red face and a grizzled beard beneath a worn straw hat. He glared at Dolly. "Get in," he said, his words terse with fury. Dolly glanced at Hannah and shrugged, but Hannah saw a look of alarm in her eyes. The man reached out, grabbed Dolly by the arm, and practically dragged her to the wagon. "Pa, you're hurting me," Dolly cried out. "You think that hurts?" he shouted. "Wait until I get you home. You're lucky I didn't find you on Main Street. You could have disgraced us in front of the whole town." Hannah stood paralyzed. "He thinks being seen with me is a disgrace." She wished she could disappear, simply vanish like a puff of smoke. She tried to think of Mama. What would she do? What would she say? But humiliation had emptied her mind. As Dolly's father started up the horses, he leaned over the side of the wagon and spat. Not at Hannah, but unmistakably toward her. She saw the blob of spit hit the ground. She could not turn her head away, so she closed her eyes tightly. For a long moment she was terrified that her legs would buckle. She stiffened her knees and pressed them together so hard that the bones hurt. Too much. She'd thought she was getting through the days as she needed to, but today had been too much. First, all those families keeping their children out of school. Then, Dolly's brainless question about her eyes, and now this vicious contempt. She forced her eyes open, unlocked her knees, and began moving. When she reached the schoolhouse, she did not remember walking there. Once in her seat, she heard Miss Walters ask, "Hannah, do you know where Dolly is?" Mr. Swenson fetched her home, miss," she said. She was astonished by her own voice. It was as if someone else had spoken, as if she herself had shrunk to the size of a dried pea, and another person had taken over her body, moving, speaking calmly. The afternoon passed in a blur. When she was finally back at the house, she hurried up the stairs to her half of the attic and threw herself down on her bed. She had thought she was going to burst into tears and was surprised when her eyes remained dry. She pulled the sheet over her head and curled up on her side. She didn't move until her breathing was no longer ragged. And then Mama came to her. "You remember what I said about when you feel sad, miss me too much, feel angry?" "Yes, Mama. No, Mama." She did remember, but at that moment she didn't want to. "You stop thinking about yourself. That's where the sadness is, inside you. You look outside instead, at other people. You do things for other people. It fills you with good feelings, less room for the bad ones." Hannah turned onto her back and mouthed the words into the sheet over her face. "Mama, I can't. I'm too tired." "Always it starts with one thing, one small thing." She groaned, threw off the sheet, and sat up. "One thing, that's all. Then I'm coming back to bed." Startled, she realized she'd spoken out loud. She went around to the board partition and picked up Papa's boots, his best pair, the ones he wore to church and to go calling. Downstairs in the kitchen, she donned her apron. She put a small lump of beeswax into a pan on the stove. While the wax melted, she lit the lamp and held a plate above the flame. The plate was chipped and cracked, unsuitable for the table. It was now used for collecting lamp black. She added castor oil to the melted wax and took everything into the lean-to where she knelt on the floor. After dipping a rag into the pan, she smeared it with lamp black and began rubbing the boot. Polishing boots and shoes was one of her least favorite tasks. The combination of wax, oil, and a lamp black made a mess. But at least the results were satisfying. The boots always looked much nicer when she was finished, almost like new. She didn't end up going back to bed after all. Instead, she took out and unfolded the brown paper she used for sketching and began to draw. None of her sketches were drawings of specific people. An oval for a head, a few quick pencil strokes for hair, no facial features. This time, though, she drew a dress on a slim, willowy body. Dolly's. She included every detail she thought Dolly would want, the very latest style from back east. A polonaise, a long, jacket-like bodice that flowed into an overskirt open at the front, with an underskirt of tier after tier of lace, ruffles at the neckline, a large satin bow on the bustle. It was a strange kind of revenge. She was drawing Dolly a dress that she would covet hungrily and never be able to own. As she mixed up biscuit for supper, Hannah considered whether to tell Papa about what had happened with Dolly and her father. Papa had seen such mockery and heard such insults plenty of times, aimed at Mama. Shortly before she died, Mama had spoken to Hannah a few times about being bullied and mocked. Hannah sensed that Mama was bringing up the subject because she knew she wouldn't be around much longer, and the thought had made Hannah too sad to heed Mama as she should have. But she had a vague memory of what Mama had told her. Mama and Papa had been out for a walk in Los Angeles a few weeks after their marriage. A man had mocked and insulted Mama, which made Papa so angry that he'd throttled the man half to death. Mama had been terrified that Papa would be arrested and charged with assault. So Hannah perceived that whenever possible she needed to shield Papa from knowing about such episodes, but it was complicated. "Your Papa, he's a good man, a good heart," Mama said. "Most white men, they think that Chinese women are only for fun. They would never marry a Chinese woman." Papa loved Hannah and Mama, but at the same time it was hard on him knowing that most white folks disapproved of them, and it was never easy for anyone, including Papa, to get rid of attitudes they had grown up with. From those conversations, Hannah understood that it was better to simply avoid the subject around Papa. Getting her into school had been a big enough hump. He didn't need other reminders of the trouble that occurred because she was half Chinese. He might as well have heard that most families were keeping their children home from school, but he hadn't said anything about it to her. Hannah rolled out the biscuit dough. A sudden pain seared through her like a blow to her stomach. She knew exactly what it was. It had happened before and would doubtless happen again. It was a piece of her heart breaking for missing Mama. To Mama, the fact that Hannah was half Chinese had been the most beautiful thing in the world. That's the end of chapter 12.